Welcome back to Rewitched, a charmed 1998 rewatch podcast. Join us on our journey as we recap, examine, and critique the series episode by episode from the beginning.
We'll be keeping our podcast spoiler free, so we welcome fans, new and old, to join us in watching and reflecting on one of our favorite shows. Currently, we're on season 4,
I'm your host, Jess Sabanko.
and I'm your host, Mia Sabanko.
Now let's get into this week's episode.
This week, we're discussing Season 4, Episode 12, Lost and Bound. It originally aired on January 31st, 2002, and had 3.89 million viewers.
So we open this episode. We're in the manor in Phoebe's room at night. She's sitting on her bed folding laundry, and Cole walks in and he's like, "Hey, guess what?" And she's like, "You've come to help me fold the laundry?" He's like, no. And she's like, "What good is being a witch if I can't just twitch my nose and make the laundry fold itself?" And he's like, "Which witch can do that?" And she's like, "Samantha Stevens." And they just look at each other and she's like, "From Bewitched?" "Oh, it's only like one of my favorite old television shows. You know, sometimes I forget that you've only been fully human for like a month." And he's like, "I'm becoming more human by the day. What would you say if I became really human and got a job?" She's like, "If that's the criteria for being really human, then I am in big trouble." He's like, "I'm serious. Paige said that a lawyer at Legal Aid quit, so she kind of recommended me. Of course, if you don't think I should, then I..." And she's like, no, actually, I think that's a great idea. It'll keep you busy and help you find your identity while I lose mine." And she gets up and goes to the other side of the room, and Cole's like, "I'm sorry." And she's like, "Nothing." And he's like, "Tell me." She says, "It's just becoming a wife. I mean, I like Samantha, but I never actually wanted to become her. See, Samantha, she was married to a human, Darren. Darren completely repressed Samantha's magic, completely denied who she was, and it wasn't because he didn't love her, it was just that's the way it had to be." He's like, "And this is one of your favorite shows?" And she says, "Well, not that part. It's just growing up, that was my only role model for a typical marriage, so that's all I knew. And he was able to meet people and leave the house and go to work and build his career. And she had to stay home and cook dinner and do the laundry. She went from being Samantha to being Mrs. Darren Stevens overnight." And he says, "Well, that won't happen to you." And she says, "Won't it?" He says, "No, you'll become Mrs. Cole Turner." Phoebe, come on. Number one, it was a different time, a different world, obviously. Number two, we're hardly typical. I proposed to you under a hail of demon goo, and you accepted while I was bleeding to death, remember? And he gets up and he's like, "Look, why don't we just do it again? Start over." And he gives her Grams's ring, which Piper gave to him. And Phoebe's like, "Well, that's not exactly a good omen. She was married with that thing 6 times." And he says, "Well, she must have liked something about it, or she would have stopped at like 3." And they both laughed, and he gets down on one knee and says, "Miss Phoebe Halliwell, I come to you a man, nothing more, nothing less, to ask you, will you be my wife?" And she says, "Yeah, I will, again." And he puts the ring on her finger, and they kiss and hug, and we see the ring glow on her finger while it's like behind his back.
Everything about this scene I love so much. I love when we get like Cole and Phoebe moments where they're like actually having discussions and like, real husband and wife, fiance type things. I like this a lot.
Yeah, I thought this was a really cute scene. I have a couple of like little things. So number one, when like Cole doesn't know what Bewitched is, that's like super shocking to me because we know he's familiar with like old movies and TV shows and stuff. So it just feels like plot sake and a half.
Yeah, especially being when you remember he had that like binder of Phoebe and everything that she's ever liked.
Literally. So he knows all her likes. Plus, we've seen him talk about old movies with Leo before. So it's just like this is out of character.
Yeah, definitely didn't make sense. Another thing was like, did Grams just get the same ring from every single husband? Like they didn't buy
Yeah.
her a new ring?
I
Like
guess not. They were like, "Oh, your first husband gave you this. Like, let's just reuse it."
Yeah, that's so weird to
Like,
me.
no wonder her marriages didn't work out. These guys were lazy and cheap, it sounds like.
Yeah, fuck that.
In terms of the other things here, I mean, this idea that I think this has already been expressed a little bit this season that Phoebe really fears falling into this really traditional role of what being a wife is and kind of losing her identity in her marriage and kind of her independence. I think this is something that has never been an issue for Piper. And you'd think that watching Piper and Leo's marriage and how well things have seemingly been going for the two of them the last year and a half or year or whatever it's been at this point, that Phoebe would have a less negative outlook than she might have like growing up and not seeing any happy marriages. But it just feels a little like on one hand, I get that she's afraid of getting into this traditional mode, but at the same time, like nothing about her life is traditional. So like the fear feels really illogical to me, and it's kind of hard for me to understand.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I can understand it in some ways, just Phoebe in general having that fear, but it doesn't quite add up knowing, like you said, like first of all, we've never heard her talk about Bewitched before. And second of all, she does have people in her life that have successful, like a successful marriage and happy and this and that. And I don't know. It feels like it's being pushed a little.
I totally agree. And the other thing I just wanted to point out here is kind of like the little jokes about Phoebe not working. And then, of course, this idea that Cole is going to be starting a job and that might be his way of finding his identity, which I think then does bring about some of that like traditional stuff she's afraid of because it's like, oh, Cole has a job and Phoebe stays home.
Right.
So it does kind of like exist in that. But obviously, the reason Phoebe stays home is because she's focused on her duties as a witch and as a charmed one.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested to see. I mean, I guess, like you said, that definitely validates her fear a little bit, but I'm definitely excited to see Cole in this position of like having a job for real for the first time that he actually has to like work for, and seeing how that goes.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously, the reference to Bewitched here, we are obviously rewitched, and we got our, title from the episode Pre-Witched, which was obviously named for Bewitched. So
Exactly. So then we move to this apartment building and we see a boy named Tyler locked himself in his room, and his parents are knocking on the door asking to be let in. And Tyler says it was an accident and that he won't let them in. And the dad's like, I'll deal with Tyler, you contact Ludlow. And Tyler's like, who's Ludlow? And the mom says, he runs the academy we told you about. And he said, I'm not going to boarding school. You can't send me away. And the mom says, honey, it's for your own good. He says, I told you I didn't mean to do it. I swear I'm not bad. And he grabs his head and kind of starts freaking out a little. And all of a sudden, a fire starts by his bookshelf. And his parents ask what's going on and say that they smell smoke.
So, interesting new character. Obviously, he is magical in some way, and this Ludlow person is. We have no idea right now.
Yeah, we don't have too much information about that.
We're just getting a lot of little hints of things that are obviously going to become clearer to us as the episode goes on. But basically, what we know here is his name is Tyler. He can start fires. It seems like he's doing it maybe on accident, and his parents are going to be sending him to some type of academy.
Exactly.
So after that, we have the theme. Then we're back at the manor in the dining room in the morning. Piper and Leo are at the table eating breakfast and reading the paper across from each other. Paige walks in tired, and Phoebe walks in cheery and offering to pour her coffee. She holds up her hand with the pot and says, Notice anything different about me? And Piper says, Engagement ring. Notice it or wear coffee? And Paige takes her hand and is like, Nice ice. And Phoebe's like, Thank you very much. I can't stop looking at it. And Paige says, I was like that when I got my belly ring. And Phoebe gives her this look and she's like, Oh, you're right. A wedding ring is totally different. And Phoebe pours her some coffee, and Piper's like, Phoebe, will you pass the milk? And she's like, It's right next to Leo. And Leo says, We're not talking to each other. And Phoebe's like, What? Still? I don't understand. Shouldn't you wait till after you have kids to start fighting about them? And Paige says, well, what's the matter? Maybe we can help. Leo says, it's about having a magical child in a non magical world. And Piper says, someone, I won't say who, has the insane notion of binding our child's powers. And Leo says, why is it insane? Rams bound your powers when you were a child. Piper says, yes, and we spent 20 odd years ignorant about our destiny. I look back on those normal days and I feel like I was a complete and total fraud. He says, I'm not saying hide the truth. It's just growing up is hard enough without the extra burden of having powers. Piper says, magic is not a burden, it is a gift. And she holds up the paper in front of her face, and Leo says, it's a lot for any child to deal with. Plus, ours will be doubly magical. Half white lighter, half witch. Paige says, that's like me. Oh, you might have some trouble. Where's Cole? We have to get to work. And Phoebe says that she'll get him and thanks Paige for getting him the job so he can bring home the bacon. And she goes, and Paige is like, since when does Phoebe care about bacon? Leo says, I'm sure she meant all breakfast meats. And Paige leaves, and he's like, Piper, would you pass me the milk? And she's like, nope.
Again, I love this scene. Like, the way we see Piper and Leo fighting like this is hysterical to me.
No, I love it. I love this type of fighting. I think it's so comedic. I think the two of them play off each other really, really well in this moment. And as usual, when we have a bigger family dynamic in a scene, it works really well for me. Obviously, we're establishing that Phoebe is super excited about her engagement ring, but some things about her seem a little off here.
Definitely a little chipper for Phoebe.
Definitely. And we also, of course, get the idea of what it is Piper and Leo are fighting about, which is this idea of whether or not they should bind their future child's powers. Interesting to see the sides here. I kind of would have expected the opposite, if I'm being honest.
Just about to say that. Like, Piper's whole magic is a gift, we shouldn't blah blah blah. Like, I would not have expected that from Piper. I would have thought she'd be quite the opposite based on the history, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's making me wonder, like, has all of Piper's lessons this season, and specifically in Brain Drain, kind of led her to really accept her destiny as a charmed one and the gift of magic in her life?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely makes you wonder about that. And I think that another part of it is, like, she kind of did bring up a good point. Like, we were ignorant about our future, about our destiny. Like, we could have been so much better, so much stronger as witches if they'd come into the craft from the beginning, you know? Maybe she sees it as like, oh, if we had done that, then maybe Prue would be alive, or maybe we would have killed the source already and this and that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And I think, Leo does maybe understand that, but at the same time is worried about the safety of their child, which again is one of the reasons why Piper is putting off having kids. So that's interesting to see as well.
Absolutely. All right, so then now we move to the stairway slash parlor area, and Phoebe goes up to Cole, who's in his suit, and says, oh, honey, you look gorgeous. Should I make you some breakfast? You know, it's the most important meal of the day. And he says, thanks, I'll just grab coffee on the way. And she's like, are you sure? I could whip up something in a jiff. And he says, in a jiff? Really? And she says, yeah, and smiles. Then Paige says that they have to go. And Phoebe tells him to have a great day and that she's very proud of him. And they kiss. And she says, look at us. We are so bewitched. And Cole's like, no, no, we're not. Feel free to use all the magic you want while I'm gone. And she says, okay, whatever makes you happy. And then him and Paige start to head out. And she looks at her ring again and says, I wonder what I should make him for dinner. And then she walks off.
So something is definitely going on with Phoebe. If it wasn't obvious before, it's becoming more and more obvious as we go on here that she's really turning into this bewitched character.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't feel like she's putting on a show, you know? This is very clear that, like, something might be going on. We don't know why Phoebe is starting to act this way, but it's becoming clear something's up.
Definitely. And we see Cole kind of pushing back on it. He's like, no, 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 like, that's not us. Use your magic. Like, stop acting weird, basically.
Yeah, and I love it. And nobody realizes it yet.
Exactly. So then we're at the social services office, and Paige shows Cole to his little office, and it's basically a closet. And he mentions that in his old life as a DA, like, he had this huge office. And she's like, yeah, well, you're human now, so get used to being humble, just like all the rest of us. And then Cynthia, who's the legal aid director, comes in and brings him his first case, and Paige leaves. And we find out that the case is about a slumlord and that Cole has 2 hours to prep. And then she leaves, and he's like, I'm only human, you know.
I love how dramatic they make it seem like, oh, on your first day, we're just gonna throw this at you. Like, that is not, that's not how this works, but okay.
I mean, I think in legal aid, they are really overworked and they do kind of throw things at you quickly.
Mhm.
But I feel like there would be more of a fill in, more of like a little bit of orientation or training going on before all this. Though Cole is coming in as an experienced lawyer, so then maybe
True.
they're just kind of like, take it and run with it.
But another thing is like, if he's gonna be on the books, like, isn't he still technically like in trouble with the law?
Yeah, what was it? Last episode or 2 episodes ago, it was made very clear that he had no ID. So
And he was asking Daryl to wipe his record, and Daryl said that he wouldn't do it. You know what I mean?
yeah, hot take.
Gonna have to be. Aside from that, not too much here. We're kind of seeing that Cole is immediately feeling a little overwhelmed in this whole like, okay, I'm a human now, you know? Have to
Definitely.
live like one.
Exactly, yes.
So then out in the main office, we see Tyler sitting on a bench, and Paige notices him and asks Mr. Cowan what's with the kid. And he says police brought him in, found him sleeping in an alley. She asks if he's a runaway, and he says that he looks like it. His name's Tyler, but I'm having trouble getting more information out of him. And she says that she's going to give him a little game to help loosen him up, and she goes to get it, while Mr. Cowan brings Tyler a soda. And he says, so have you thought about giving us a phone number so we can call your parents and let them know you're okay? And Tyler doesn't say anything. He's like, do you want them to know you're okay? Did they hurt you? Tyler says, no, they didn't hurt me. And Cowan's like, oh, good, all right. But something happened. And he said, I don't want to talk about it. And Mr. Cowan says, I know it's hard, Tyler, but talking is how we fix. And then he yells, I said I don't want to talk about it. And he grabs his head like he did before, and all of a sudden the garbage can catches on fire. And Paige sees this happen. So Cowan gets up to go check on the fire, and Tyler runs out. Then Paige grabs her bag and runs after him.
So I will say this is kind of our first time seeing Mr. Cowan actually interact with one of their clients. I don't really know what we're
Yeah.
supposed to call it. And he's really good at his job.
Yeah.
Like
he
he's
is.
very sweet. He talks to him in a really like respectful and clear way. I really like seeing this. And I think seeing a really like professional, really great and respectable black man in a business setting, especially in TV at this time, is really great. Like we see it with Daryl, and having another character like this, I think, is really great representation to have on the show.
Absolutely, I definitely agree. Yeah, I kind of never really thought about this as the first time we're seeing him interact, and he is doing it in a very healthy way, like not pressuring him or anything, and it's working for me.
Yeah, and I think it's nice to see kind of a man taking on this role. I think we're used to seeing women be empathetic and being really supportive, especially of children. And seeing that in a man, I think, is also healthy too. So I think that's something the show's doing well here too.
Absolutely.
And then, Paige, of course, getting this idea that, like, well, if he's nervous to talk, maybe we can, like, give him something kids like. Shows us that Paige is good at her job as well, which I think is something we've gotten hints of. Though I think her magical duties are getting in the way of her actually being good at her job.
Absolutely. And obviously, we can kind of assume that this happened for a reason, that Paige was able to see him start the fire and kind of know what's going on. And of course, was the only one who saw him run out. So, definitely interested to see how they kind of intertwine and figure things out amongst each other.
Definitely. And we're also seeing here that, like the sisters, Tyler's powers seem to be connected to his emotions. And when he gets really overwhelmed or upset, that seems to be when he's starting these fires.
Absolutely.
So then we're out in the parking lot, and Paige finds Tyler hiding next to a car, and he gets up and starts to walk away. And she's like, hey, don't go. It's okay. You don't have to be afraid. I won't tell anyone I saw you start the fire. He's like, you saw? And she's like, yeah, but nobody else did. And I promise I won't tell. He's like, I didn't mean to do it. She's like, I know, Tyler. I know. He's like, please don't make me go back to the clinic. I don't ever want to go back to my foster parents. They don't understand me. She says, I know a place I can take you where you'll be safe, but you got to trust me, okay? And they walk away together.
This horrible, horrible representation for children. I know a place, just trust me. A random adult. I mean, I guess she is a social worker and this and that, and it makes sense because we know she's telling the truth, but like, just imagine that telling a kid, like, hey, come with me. Like,
I wasn't even thinking
just
about
trust
that, but
me.
you're so right. Like, this is really like, don't worry, like, I'll keep our secret. Like,
Yeah,
it's giving bad vibes there.
definitely. I mean, I guess they couldn't really find a better way to like go about it, but it's definitely not a very good representation. Like,
No,
or what's it
definitely
called?
not. And also, like, when she's saying, like, I promise I won't tell, like, spoiler, but she's gonna immediately tell her sister too. So,
So now she's a creep and a liar.
yes. Also, here we find out that the parents we saw in the first scene are his foster parents. We're not really sure how long he's been with them or what the history is there, but obviously he doesn't feel comfortable with them, and probably they have some issues with his gift, we'll just say.
Absolutely. So then, back inside the social services office a little bit later, Tyler's foster parents are there as Cowan finishes putting out the fire, and they introduce themselves and say that they're looking for Tyler and ask if he's there. And he says that he was, and the dad's like, "Thank God, we've been checking everywhere. We've been worried sick." And the mom says, "What do you mean he was here? Where is he?" And Cowan says there was a fire, and in the chaos, he ran off. And they start freaking out, and the husband asks for a moment alone with his wife, so they step aside. The dad takes her into this like hall and says, "You're making a scene." And she says, "Can a mother be upset about the loss of her son?" And he says, "You're not acting like an overreacting parent. You're acting like a," she says, "a what?" He says, "a demon." She says, "We don't have time to play concerned parents. Ludlow wants the boy before nightfall. No boy, no bounty." And he says, "These humans can help." She says, "So what are we supposed to do? Wait until Tyler uses his power again?" And he says, "That's the only way we have of tracking him." And she says, "What if he doesn't get angry?" And he says, he will. Just be patient." And then they glow red and teleport out in the middle of the office.
Yeah, literally exposing their powers, but whatever.
Yeah.
He was
Like, what do you
worried
think
about her
Cowan's thinking?
yelling
Like,
and making a scene, but teleporting out was fine.
yeah, like, what do you think Cowan's thinking? Like, they just vanished without a trace.
Literally, they're like, we're looking for our son. Gone.
Yeah, gone with the wind.
God's sake. But obviously, here we get the reveal that the parents are bounty hunters, demons, and Ludlow wants the boy, so that's what they're going for. I guess we can assume he's another demon.
Can assume he's somewhat of a higher level demon than them, at least.
Yeah, and we know bounty hunters tend not to be that high level demon.
Exactly.
I also will say that, I mean, I agree, like, the mother's reaction didn't really seem like a concerned parent. Like, it very much seemed like, I need this boy, but, like, for a weird reason. Like, not like I miss my son. So,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I could kind of see it like the reaction of like, "Hey, like, no, you don't understand. Like, I need to have my son back. Like, I'm freaking out, you know?" But it definitely was coming across a little bit like, "Okay, bitch, like, calm the fuck down." You know what I mean? Like, what are you acting like that for? You might have other motivations or other intentions.
yes. But I'm also saying this as someone who doesn't have a child and has never lost, like, my child somewhere.
Mhm.
So,
That fear will get you.
I'm sure it will.
I mean, at least if any parent is like my own mother, who would go crazy. Maybe that's not normal, but I thought it is.
Then we're back at the manor in the conservatory, and Paige walks up to Piper and Leo, and Tyler isn't really talking and seems afraid. And Leo's saying, "Of what?" And Paige is like, "Himself, his powers. He's just showing all the signs of a kid who's never received sustained affection." And I get the sense that he's always felt like an outsider and a bit of a freak. And now he's found out that in some ways he kind of is. And she goes, and Leo's like, "Which is why it could make sense for us to bind his powers." And Piper says, "Yeah, and maybe we could just take off one of his legs at the same time because, they're both a part of him." Leo's like, "It's not the same thing, Piper. Tyler's powers could be a danger to himself and to others." She's like, "You know what? Don't make our issues his issues. I think you need to give him a chance to learn how to control it. Maybe that's why we met him, to teach him, guide him." And Phoebe walks in with a huge plate of cookies and she's like, "Feed him." Paige, who like comes out of nowhere because I thought she left.
Yeah.
Apparently she's just still standing there. And she's like, "Wow, Phoebe, you went all out." Phoebe's like, "Oh, well, you know me. Any excuse to spend a little extra time in the kitchen." And Piper's like, "I do know you, and that's just not true." And she's like, "Oh, but it is now that I'm going to be Sadie, married lady." And Piper's like, "All right, Sadie, how about I take the cookies to the kid?" And she takes them and is going to try to talk to him. Paige is going back to work and she leaves, and Piper makes a comment about Phoebe's hairspray, and they open the doors to go to the living room.
So I really like this here, that kind of the issues that Piper and Leo are having, discussing them having kids, and it's kind of being played with our connecting to our A plot of the story. So I'm looking forward to see where that goes. And I do understand where Piper's coming from, like thinking maybe we should give him a chance to learn to control it like they were able to, you know? And when we see Piper interact with him, like I love the way it goes down, but obviously we'll talk about that when it comes.
Yeah, I think we see some really like well done stuff here. Like you're saying, the continuation of Piper and Leo's argument from before and seeing both their sides then getting applied to Tyler and his issues with his powers. We see more of Phoebe obviously growing more and more into this traditional 1950s housewife, bringing the cookies and talking about how much she loves being in the kitchen and all this kind of stuff. Whereas that's Piper's real personality, which is funny because like Piper doesn't have that little like chipper cookie cutter wife type of attitude, but like she does love some traditional feminine things like cooking and like, taking care of a family.
Everybody.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see that because it just shows that like women can be that and be other things at the same time.
Absolutely. That doesn't have to dictate your whole personality or your whole life.
Exactly.
So then we move into the living room and Tyler is playing a game. Then Piper walks in with the cookies and offers them to him. And he takes one, and Phoebe looks so happy in the doorway, and then she just walks away. And Piper's like, it's hard to believe, but something amazing has happened to you. You've been given a gift, a magical gift. And as strange as it sounds, you're not alone. I know exactly what you're going through. And he says, yeah, right, you start fires too? And she says, not exactly, but I do know what it's like to possess a power that you can't control and want so desperately to be normal, but it's just not an option. And because there weren't any options, you sometimes get so angry that you just wanna, and then she blows up this vase. He goes, whoa, what was that? What did you just do? And she said, I proved that I know what you're going through. And he says, but how did you do that? She said, pretty much the same way you do. I've just learned how to focus my emotions and control it. And then he sits down and says, I wish that I could control mine. Then I could be around people. She says, is that why you ran away? Because you were afraid you were going to hurt someone? And he says, I was scared. I set fire to the living room couch. I didn't mean to, but my foster mom was yelling at me that I was good for nothing. And it made me so mad. And then he grabs his head again, and all of a sudden a chair catches on fire. And they both get up, and he starts immediately apologizing. And she says, "It's okay. In this house, it's okay." And she freezes the fire, and he says, "Now that's cool." And Piper's like, "Leo, could you get some water, please?"
So I really love this moment. I feel like this was a really strong bonding moment because Piper, of course, is the one who struggled most with control of her powers and having a dangerous power where she was afraid she was going to hurt people with it. So I think this was the perfect pairing for who would be best to talk to him and kind of help him through this struggle. I also like, I know we've talked about it earlier this season, but how much confidence Piper has gained in her powers and in her control that she is able to serve as a role model to this younger magical being.
Yeah, absolutely. Piper's really come far and really come into herself, and her magical abilities. I'm so happy to see that confidence in Piper that we did not see so much of in the beginning of the show. So I'm excited to see that kind of grow even further and see where that goes, especially with the idea of maybe her becoming a mother and how that role will affect her. All of it's very exciting to me. And I love seeing her in this like motherly position with Tyler and just kind of the interactions between the two of them. She just has that natural instinct that I think is so cute to see.
Definitely. And I know we've heard Piper say before that like she doesn't feel maternal, she doesn't feel like she has that. But then we see her interacting with this little boy, and it's so obvious that she does. And it kind of reminds me of the way Phoebe's like, well, I don't see myself as a wife. I could never be that. And then we have Piper here saying, like, I don't see myself as a mother. And then we see both of them are obviously very capable of this because all it takes to be good at either of those things is to love and care for someone, which both
Absolutely.
of them are very, very capable of.
100%.
Also, obviously, we're getting the idea here that beyond us knowing that his foster parents are demons and bounty hunters, obviously they're kind of being like abusive and terrible towards Tyler, likely to get him to use his powers, but also probably just because they're evil.
Yeah, that'll do it.
So then we're in the kitchen, and Phoebe's hair has gotten even bigger with all the hairspray, and she's wearing an apron and making this whole like feast for like 8 people. And Leah walks in and she says she has an important question. And he's like, okay. She's like, do you think the little boy will be staying for lunch? He's like, I would imagine so. What's the important question? She's like, that was it. And Leo's confused. He's like, Phoebe, are you feeling all right? She's like, peachy keen. And the phone rings and she gets it. It's Cole. He's like, you've got to keep me from killing this slumlord. I've got a meeting in like 10 minutes with this guy who's the biggest ass. She's like, hold it. Do not make me march down there and wash your mouth out with soap, mister. And he's like, huh? She's like, do you want me to twitch my nose and turn him into Mr. Nice? He's like, no, I want to use an energy ball and send him where he belongs. The jerk cut off the heat, causing an elderly tenant to get pneumonia. Then he tried to evict her. And she's like, okay, well, just relax and try to get through it. And I will have a martini waiting for you when you get home. He's like, a martini? She's like, yeah, and a steak. You really need some more red meat in your diet. He's like, what the hell are you talking about? And the doorbell rings and she's like, company, I have to go, and hangs up.
It's just like the progression of Phoebe getting more and more intense in this like role, like that we can assume, or I mean, I don't know if it's a first time viewer thing to notice that, but like obviously it's from the ring, right? Like
Yeah.
that's clear, right? We don't have to.
Oh, well, I don't know if that's clear, but it's very clear that something magical is going on that's making her turn into this character she's
But the
afraid
ring
of
glowed.
becoming.
The ring glowed.
You're right. The ring did glow. It's obviously the ring. I'm just
Yeah.
being
Like that's the thing. There's so many times where like since we aren't first time viewers, like I don't know if I'm like, is this something that they would pick up on, or is it just because I already know? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're right, because the ring did glow, so we can get the idea that that's where this magic is coming from, though we don't really understand why yet this is happening, just that it's linked to the ring.
Exactly.
Also, I love the way like Cole's calling her to complain. I think that's so cute and coupley.
I was thinking the same thing when I saw it. I was like, oh. He just wanted to call a little rant to his girl. I love it.
I love it. And I love how like she's just like does not give a fuck. She's like, company, gotta go.
Yeah. I love it so much.
It's perfect. And like, shout out to Alyssa Milano. Her comedic timing in this episode has been so good.
Yes, on point. And Cole's reactions to everything have been pretty hilarious too.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so then in the doorway, Piper starts walking toward the door, and Phoebe runs off and is like, I'll get it, and scares the crap out of Piper. And she opens it, and it's Tyler's parents asking for him. So she lets them in and asks if she can make them anything. And Piper's like, wait, how did you know he was here? And the mom's like, maternal instinct. And then Piper gives her a weird look, and the dad punches her. And Tyler runs out and is like, Piper. Then the dad says he's got him, and Piper blows up the clock behind him. And the mom throws an energy ball and breaks a lamp, while this whole time Phoebe is hiding behind the wall. Then Leo dives in front of Piper and tackles her when the next energy ball comes. And Tyler's like, leave them alone. And the dad's like, nobody is keeping us from collecting our bounty. And Tyler says, no, stop. And he grabs his head and sets them both on fire, and they vanquish.
Pretty good fight scene.
Yeah.
You know me, I always love seeing a man sucker punch a woman. It's just love when the show does that. Couldn't have the woman character do it. It had to be the man.
Yeah, no, definitely didn't love that, but
This
I don't know why they
season
do
just
that.
loves it. I don't even know what to say. Like, so much. Because again, when it's supernatural, I don't have an issue with like, you know, the men and women fighting. That works for me. But the second it's like a man punching a woman in the face, I'm like, why is this necessary?
Yeah, like why did you have to throw that here? It was so unnecessary.
I just, ugh. But okay, that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have, of course, this idea that Tyler vanquished them, which we'll see kind of the reaction to that in the next scene.
Yeah, first kill. Double
Also,
homicide.
double homicide. Also, we have Phoebe hiding, which is very unlike her, obviously taking on this persona.
Exactly.
So then we're in the living room, and Piper and Tyler are sitting on the couch, Leo in the chair. And Tyler's like, I didn't mean to hurt them. And Piper's like, Tyler, you don't have to explain anything. We were there. We saw what happened. He's like, I thought I was going to hurt someone, and then I did. Leo says, you did what you had to do. He says, I did a bad thing. Piper says, Tyler, listen to me. Look at me. You didn't do a bad thing. Those were very bad people, and they were going to hurt us. You protected us. Come on, I want to show you something. And she takes his hand and they get up together.
Like, this is so sad. Piper and Leo having to like parent him and comfort him and be like, how do you do that? You know, how do you be like, hey, like, no, that's not an okay thing to do, but you're not in the wrong for this. Like, what you did is okay in this situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because at this point, Tyler kind of doesn't understand demons and witches and all that kind of stuff. So all he knows is that he killed two people.
Yeah.
And that's what he was afraid of, right? With his powers, that he was going to lose control and hurt somebody. And obviously, what he did wasn't wrong because they were demons, but he doesn't know that yet. So I can only imagine like how guilty and horrible he must be feeling and how confused and like, oh, just this poor little boy, and like Piper and Leo trying so hard to be like, no, like, you don't have to explain to us. Like, we get why you did it. Like, you're not bad.
All of these things. Yeah, the guilt and the shame he must be feeling. But I love that like Piper just immediately knows what to say and what to do, you know?
Yeah,
She's
and I
just
mean,
on it like that.
this is something Piper's been through before too, because when she first found out she was a witch, she was so afraid she was evil. So I think that that's something she can really, again, relate to Tyler with.
Yeah. So then we move up to the attic, and the three of them walk in, and she asks if if she can trust him, then shows him the Book of Shadows. And she says, let's find out who those people really were. Demonic bounty hunters, driven by greed. These heartless, low-level demons will stop at nothing to collect their bounty. And Tyler says, so if they're bad, does that mean that I didn't do anything bad? And Leo says, that's right. And he says, is there anything about me in there? And Piper turns the pages and hands it to him to read. It says, a fire starter, an extremely rare and coveted magical creature. What does coveted mean? And Piper says, it means highly desirable, wanted. Tyler's like, I'm wanted? Oh. Piper says, very much so. Their power is linked to their emotions, first manifests itself in adolescence. They're often trained to be bodyguards of the source. And her and Leo look at each other, and Tyler asks what the source is. Piper's like, a really, really bad guy. And Leo's like, which means he's probably resurfacing if the bounty hunters are after Tyler. And Tyler says, so Ludlow must be a bounty hunter too then. And Piper asks who Ludlow is, and he says that it's some guy who runs some sort of academy. My demon parents were going to send me there. And Leo says to train, to serve the source. And Tyler's like, so then I am bad. And Piper asks why he says that. And he's like, well, if I'm supposed to use my powers to protect somebody bad. And Piper says, no, that's not how powers work. They're not good or bad by themselves, it's how we use them. And then Leo tells Tyler to read more while he talks to Piper, and they walk to the other side of the room.
So this obviously we're finding out all the little background. We get this idea that fire starters seem to be neutral, but are often taken advantage of and used by the source for evil. We get the idea that this is obviously scary for Tyler, who obviously doesn't want to be bad based on his reaction to killing his demon parents. And the way he says, I'm wanted.
I know, my soul broke.
This poor kid, like, oh.
He must like you can tell he feels so low about himself, and it's especially hard to see that in children because children are supposed to have that innocence, you know what I mean? And he just kind of didn't have a chance to have that, and it makes me really sad.
Yeah, no, it's really heartbreaking. And then moving to this idea that, his demon parents were just trying to use him to get money from the source or power or whatever the fuck it is the bounty hunters are after.
Yeah.
And, kind of this reaction that Piper and Leo have when they're like, oh man, the source is probably resurfacing because they haven't seen him in a hot minute ever since Cole weakened him in Brain Drain.
Exactly. Yeah, we haven't seen the source come back up in a while.
So then over on the other side of the room, Piper and Leo are talking, and Piper says, see, with a little guidance, he's already on the road to acceptance and control. Leo says, that's great, but I think we have another problem. I figured out how the bounty hunters found out where Tyler is. They tracked his powers. She's like, you mean when he blew up the chair? He's like, yeah, so when he vanquished them, Piper says, so there may be other bounty hunters on the way. And they look at each other and then over at Tyler.
Dun dun dun. How did Leo figure this out?
He's just smart, and it's also plot sake.
What else is new? So I like this kind of pretty much just pushing the plot and showing us like, oh no, something might be happening. It's like this suspenseful moment.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty clear, that it was the tracking of his powers because we saw them show up at social services immediately after he used his power, and then again at the manor right after.
Exactly. And they also said it.
True. They did spell it out for us as well.
Yes. So then downstairs in the kitchen, Phoebe is cooking still and singing a little song about making soup for Cole. And then a bounty hunter appears and says, where's the fire starter? And Phoebe yells and jumps and says, you nearly scared me half to death. And he's like, the boy, now. Phoebe says, I don't like your tone of voice, mister. And he's about to throw an energy ball at her, but then Piper approaches and blows him up. And Phoebe smiles. And then Piper's like, are you all right? And she says, yes, no messy cleanup. And Piper says, since when do you scream instead of fight? And Phoebe says, actually, I did consider scratching him. Then Piper tells her about the bounty hunters, and Ludlow thinks they should get him first. And Phoebe looks at her hands and says, ew, dishpan hands. And Piper's like, Leo and I can pose as bounty hunters and say that we have Tyler. We can gain access to Ludlow and vanquish him. And Phoebe says, sure, just as long as you're home for dinner. And Piper's like, but he's got to be pretty powerful, which means we might need the power of 3. So I'll bring Ludlow here just in case and call Paige and tell her to get her butt back here as soon as possible. And Phoebe says okie dokie, and Piper goes while Phoebe goes to pick up the phone. It's so obvious here, like Piper's very much like in her own head trying to plan out what to do, that she can't even focus on like Phoebe acting so weird, you know what I mean?
Literally, like she's so focused on this plan that she's not even noticing that Phoebe is just like
Not Phoebe.
not herself in any way, shape, or form. And I think her plan overall is pretty solid to pose as bounty hunters, lure Ludlow out, and use the power of three to vanquish him.
Absolutely, I agree.
So then we're at social services / in the kitchen. It's a phone call between Paige and Phoebe. We see Paige is overwhelmed at work when the phone starts ringing, and Phoebe's like, Serena? Sam. She's like, Phoebe? Look, I'm in the middle of a zillion things. Can I call you back? She's like, Piper wants you to come home, and I want you to bring your appetite. And Paige is like, yeah, Phoebe, like I said, I'm in the middle of a zillion things. And there's a loud bang, and a guy gets thrown into the room, and we see Cole follow in, pissed. And everyone in the office is watching. And the guy's like, back off, this is assault. And Cole says, yeah, well, it's better than what you do, which is close to murder. And Paige is like, oh my God, I do not believe what Cole is doing. Phoebe's like, Cole? How is my little sweetie? And Cole's like, get up, you scum. And he's like, I'll see you in court. And he's like, yeah, you'll see me every time you turn around. And his boss comes over and tells him to let go of him. And Cole yells at him to turn the heat back on and then lets him go. And the guy walks away, and the boss starts to fire him, but he yells that he quits at the same time, and Paige just kind of like looks down.
That's like the worst too, because even on a realistic note, there have been times where like I'll have friends that I'll vouch for to like get them hired somewhere, and then like you're representing me. Like if I'm the one that brought you here, now you're making me look bad by doing something like this or getting yourself fired or not showing up. Like things like that have happened to me before, and I know just Paige is thinking like, what was I thinking?
Yeah, no, I've only ever like gotten one of my friends like a job where I like recommended her to do it, and like she was there for a while and she did a good job, so it was
Yeah.
fine. But like that's why I wouldn't vouch for just anybody, because like I am a very like good worker. So like
Mhm.
I don't want like someone coming in and like representing me and like not
Absolutely.
doing a good job.
Same here. But aside from that personal real life anecdote, so I really like, again, Phoebe still just acting weird, and that whole Serena Sam thing was like, what?
Literally turning into Sam.
Yeah, like she quite literally is Sam now. And Cole acting like this feels very Cole to me. But I will say I like that it's kind of on the good guy's side, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, we even saw this back in his very first episode when he went after Emilio like this.
Yeah, he's always kind of been that intense and aggressive guy, at least before he had magic, so he was able to get away with it.
Exactly. And like we saw in that case, like the person he was attacking was actually like working with demons, so it ended up not mattering at all. But in this case, obviously, you can't solve all issues in life with physical violence, which I think is something Cole's gonna have to learn.
Absolutely.
And, you know, just when all this is going on and Phoebe's like, how is my little sweetie?
Yeah, perfect comedic timing.
So funny.
So then we're back in the living room at the manor, and Tyler is playing a game on the couch again, and Piper and Leo are watching from across the room. And Piper says he looks so normal. And Leo says, you sure we should let him play those games? Aren't they kind of violent? Then Tyler loses and starts to get upset, but calms himself down. And Leo says, looks like he's learning to handle his power. And Piper says he wouldn't have been given them if he couldn't. And he says, is that what you think about you and your sisters? And she says, I don't know, maybe. All I do know is that when we finally got our powers back, we felt like we were scrambling to catch up. And I can't help but think if we had had our powers from day one, we would have been much more prepared. Things would have turned out different. And he says, Prue would still be alive? She says, and the source would be dead, and we would be on our way to having a family as opposed to just talking about it. And he says, and life would be perfect. And she says, not perfect, just easier. And they look back over at Tyler.
So I really like this conversation.
Mhm.
I feel like this is a really healthy, really strong conversation between the two of them as a couple and kind of finally coming to almost more of an understanding about this argument that they've obviously been having since before the episode started.
Mhm.
I think we're understanding a lot about where Piper's fears are coming from, which you talked about earlier in the episode. This idea that had they had their powers and grown up with them, maybe they wouldn't have suffered the loss of their sister. Maybe they wouldn't have even suffered the loss of their grandmother, which we know
Yeah.
that was destiny intervening, and probably would be, if not already having defeated the source, closer to defeating that enemy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, Piper's points here are very valid. And like you said, this was a very healthy, mature conversation that definitely came with understanding, which Leo's so good at. Like, I wish all conversations in real life could go this way with men, but never does. Never. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say with men, but women too. Just my only experiences.
Just in relationships
Yeah,
in
just
general.
relationships in general.
But to kind of go to another point, this idea of, like video games causing violence and like parents being afraid of that back in the day, we get that little hint here, which I think kind of connects to things that were going on kind of in pop culture at the time. And just this idea that like Leo's really pointing out to her, like, oh, like if this one little thing was different, would our lives be perfect? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we all do. And it's like, well, if this one little thing hadn't happened, everything else around me would be fixed. And
The butterfly effect.
exactly. But there's no way of ever telling if that's true or accurate or not. And it's just, I think, hopeful thinking a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that mindset is kind of problematic because life is life, if it's not one problem, it's another. That's just the way things go, like nothing will ever be 100% perfect. There's no way that can happen.
Yes. And for someone like me, that's very hard to accept.
Valid.
Then we're over in the entryway, and the door opens, and Cole and Paige walk in arguing. And Leo and Piper walk over to them, and Paige is saying how she has to go back to work, unlike Cole. And Cole's like, yeah, the whole legal aid thing didn't work out for me. See, I thought lawyers were supposed to seek out justice. And Piper's like, okay, we've got bigger problems. The source wants Tyler, so let's focus on the most pressing matter at hand. Then Phoebe walks in saying it's time for lunch, and she like side kisses Cole and is saying how she's happy as a clam and starts flashing between black and white and color. And Piper's like, what was that? And Phoebe's like, what was what? And Cole's like, you just flashed black and white. She's like, oh, don't be silly. And Paige's like, oh, he's not being silly. We all saw it. And Piper's like, okay, we don't have time for this. We have to get to Ludlow before the source does. So Cole, fix Phoebe. I don't care how you do it, just do it. She needs to write a spell. He's like, which spell? She's like, a power of 3 spell, in case Leo and I have no choice but to lure Ludlow back here. And then the oven timer goes off, and Phoebe goes to get the biscuits. And Leo says, we'll need some proof for Ludlow that we actually have Tyler. And Piper says, we're going to take his jacket. And Tyler walks over and asks why he can't go with them. And Piper says, because it's too dangerous. He says, but I can protect myself. Besides, I helped you out before, didn't I? She says, this is different. And Leo says, okay, everyone, be ready, be prepared, no surprises. And him and Piper hold each other and orb out, and as they are, Tyler jumps on his back.
I love it. Again, another really great scene that we have going on here. The whole Paige and Cole arguing, and then Piper and Leo's chaos with caring about Tyler mostly, and then Phoebe now officially being seen by everyone as like, okay, something is really wrong with her right now, magically. And I love how they're just like not very concerned about it because
I
she's
know.
just turning into a housewife is all that it's
Literally, it's like she's turning black and white, and Piper's like, just fix it. I
Yeah.
really don't give a shit. Just do it.
Yeah, just fix her.
I need her to write a spell.
Yeah. I mean, valid. I like that she puts Tyler first like that. She's so invested,
Yeah, and it is that Hallowell one-track mind that we're so used to.
Absolutely. Aside from that, I do like kind of their plan. I think that it's pretty logical,
Yeah, I agree.
And I love how they threw in the whole like, oh, no surprises, just so Tyler can hop on his back and they can like make it sound.
Yeah, definitely.
Then outside of this academy, the three of them appear and Piper's like, "Hey, what happened?" And Leo says he jumped the orb. And she's like, "Dude, you are so going back right now." And then a demon shimmers in and then two more and they all look around very like dun dun dun.
Yeah. So obviously here we're getting the setup that Piper obviously wanted to send Tyler back, but that's not going to happen.
Mm-mm.
So then we come back from commercial. We're still outside the academy, and one of the demons asks who they are and what they're doing there. And Leo's like, "We got lost." And he says, "The academy is protected by charms, which means you can't find the place unless you're looking for it. Kill them." And the demons start to summon energy balls, and Piper freezes them. And Leo says that they should go, and Tyler says, "I'm not going." And Piper's like, "You want to bet?" And he starts running towards the gate, and she grabs them, and he's like, "Look, they don't know I'm a fire starter yet. Once they do, they'll take us right to Ludlow. Isn't that what we want?" And Piper's like, "No, not at your expense, and I'm not going to let you go in there." He's like, "I don't want to spend the rest of my life with bad guys chasing me." And Leo says he's right. Wherever we take him, they will eventually find him. And she's like, "Yeah, but if something happens to him," and Tyler says, "They won't hurt me. Remember, I'm coveted." And Leo thinks they have a better chance at getting Ludlow with him. And Tyler says, "I'd like to do something good for once." And Piper says, "All right, but you stay next to me. And if anything goes wrong, we are out of there." And they all agree, and Piper unfreezes things, and the demons are confused about how they got behind them. And Piper says, "We're bounty hunters. We need to see Ludlow." The demon says, "Who's the kid?" Tyler says, "I'm not a kid. I'm a fire starter." And the demon asks for the password, and Piper blows him up. And another demon goes, "That was it. You're in," and waves his hand, and the gate opens, and they all walk in.
I love that. The whole demonic side, they just kill each other.
Even though a couple episodes it was like, it's illegal to kill another evil being, and it's like, now that's the fucking password into the account.
Yeah, like it's again some inconsistencies that we constantly find throughout every episode. But aside from that, I like this whole conversation between all of them. Leo kind of understanding and seeing it like, he's not wrong. This is our best bet. And for him to be so concerned about having to deal with this for the rest of his life. And Leo's like, yeah, they're gonna follow wherever we go. It's got to either be handled like this or maybe hints of that whole little should he be magical or should he not that they were kind of arguing about before.
Yeah, definitely. I totally see that too. I also see for Tyler's character a lot of bravery and strength, especially considering his age and his inexperience with the magical world. I really like seeing him wanting to do what's right. I think that shows his true nature and the fact that even if captured by the source, maybe he wouldn't be able to do his job because he's not evil.
True, but they know how to wear you down.
True. I'm sure they'd figure it out, especially since he is a little boy. But I definitely like seeing that strength of character
Me too.
and his willingness to kind of join the fight with Piper and Leo, who he's obviously forming a connection with. We see them serving as kind of like these parental figures and maybe the first healthy parental figures he's ever had.
Most likely, yes. So then back at the manor in the bathroom, Cole opens the door and Phoebe is in a bubble bath and she's like, "Oh, hi, honey." And he's like, "What are you doing? This is no time to be taking a bath. Piper might come home any minute and she's counting on you to write a spell." And Phoebe's like, "Oh, I tried, but I only got as far as, 'Hey, demon.'" And then my mind went blank. And she blows the bubbles at him and smiles. And Cole's like, "Look, I don't know what's happening to you. It might be some sort of backfiring spell or curse, but you gotta snap out of it. There's work to be done." She says, "Yeah, hey, why aren't you at the office?" And he says, "Because I quit my job." And she's like, "You what?" And he says, "I don't think I'm cut out for that whole 9 to 5 life." And she says, "Oh, honey, what will you do?" He says, I don't know, I'm still searching for who I am, but we know who you are, which is a demon-fighting, ass-kicking witch who never lets her sisters down. So get out of the bathtub and show me what you're made of. Then she stands up and flashes black and white again, and she's like, better? And then Paige walks in and asks how it's going, and she's like, oh god, full frontal Phoebe, sorry, and turns away. And Cole's like, she just flashed. And Paige says, yeah, I got that. And he's like, no, I mean, she just flashed black and white. And Paige is like, again? She's like an old TV show that's on the blink or something. And he says, hey, maybe that's the connection. The TV show Bewitched, is that in black and white or in color? Paige says originally in black and white. And Phoebe crosses her arms over her chest and says, brr, I'm very chilly. Then Paige tells her to sit down, so she does. And she's like, why are you asking about Bewitched? And he said, because Phoebe was worried about becoming an old-fashioned housewife like Samantha. And that might be fine for some people, but for Phoebe, that would be kind of dangerous. So I'll take care of her, and you need to write the Power of Three spell. And Paige is like, no, I've never done that before. And he says, well, you're gonna have to learn fast, so go, hurry. And she leaves, and Cole holds out a towel for Phoebe and wraps her in it. Adorable.
Yeah, so this scene is always one of those scenes that I really, really remember, and it stands out so vividly in my mind. It is so funny. It's so well done. Like Paige's reaction, which I think is better than some of the other reactions we've seen to like the sisters coming in when their
Right.
siblings are in the shower, especially with their significant other.
Yeah, like it's very. They've never seemed to mind. Like it's for everybody, I guess. Paige actually had like a normal reaction, I think.
Yeah, she was like, "Oh God, like you're naked and Cole's
Yeah.
here. Like maybe I should leave."
Yeah, exactly. Like this is weird. This is uncomfortable.
But I also love like when Cole comes in and he's like, this is not the time to be taking a bath. What the fuck? And she's just like, my mind went blank.
I only got as far as "Hey, demon." That's my favorite line from this episode.
It's
Always
so
cracks
good.
me up.
It's so good. And this idea that now, because Phoebe obviously is turning into Samantha, or at least someone like Samantha, she's incapable of doing the spell, which means Paige is gonna have to take a new journey in her witchcraft.
Absolutely. I'm definitely so excited to see what Paige can come up with.
Me too.
And of course, how Cole will end up fixing Phoebe. Best of luck.
Maybe she'll just stay like this forever. Huh?
Yeah, that's it. She's officially Samantha.
So then we're at the academy inside, and Tyler, Leo, and Piper are walking upstairs, and Tyler's like, so we're gonna take him out, right? And Leo's like, shh. And Piper's like, yes, I'll go in first. And he's like, what if I can't? I mean, I have to get angry for my power to work, don't I? She's like, so? He's like, so what if I'm really just scared instead? What if it doesn't work? And they get to the top, and the demon tells them to walk through the door. And they do, like literally just go through it. Then they're inside this office that's really old fashioned. And Leo's like, where is he? And Piper's like, Ludlow. And we see electricity appear, and he teleports into the seat. And he's like, so you've brought us the alleged fire starter. You've given us quite the runaround, haven't you, boy? And he and Piper look at each other. He's like, I said, haven't you, boy? And Tyler says, yes. And he's like, yes, what? And he's like, yes, sir. And Ludlow's like, no one teaches manners anymore. And Piper and Leo like fake laugh at this. And Piper's like, about our payment. See, we don't want any surprises. And she tries to freeze him. And she's like, yeah, because we hate surprises. And tries again. And Ludlow's like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, you're afraid that I'll grab the boy and stiff you. If the child is a fire starter, you'll get your reward. If he's not, you'll all die. And Leo says he is, and Ludlow asks them to prove it. Tyler looks at Piper, and she's like, go ahead. And he stares out, and nothing happens. And Ludlow's like, not even a little flicker? And Piper's like, he's just a little scared. And he's like, oh, that's ridiculous. Don't be scared, boy. You're closing in on the most important moment of your life. Prove what you are, and you'll meet the source, the most powerful evil that exists in the universe. And keeps like antagonizing him, and Piper's trying to defend him. and Ludlow yells at Piper, and Tyler sets him on fire. And they all back up and watch, and then the flames go out, and Ludlow smiles. He's like, "Excellent, well done." And he holds up his hand, and smoke comes out, and Tyler passes out and falls back into the chair. And Piper's like, "What did you do to him?" He's like, "Just a precaution until the source arrives to kill him and steal his power." Piper's like, "But," and he's like, "Your bounty's outside," and throws them out the door, and they appear outside the academy, where Piper's like, "Leo, hurry, go get him." And he tries to orb, but the gate blocks him, and he bounces back and gets up, and they both look super upset.
So things didn't go as planned.
Not at all.
Not very surprising, but I like it because that keeps things interesting. First of all, this was not the information they had received in the Book of Shadows, and not what originally those were for, because otherwise, why would there be this academy for them, you know? So it's very clear that that must be some sort of ploy with the source, that he's trying to pick up more powers and become even more powerful, which in turn is more dangerous for the sisters as well.
Definitely, and it makes total sense considering we already know he's been weakened before. Obviously, in terms of things that kind of stood out to me in this scene, we have again Piper and Tyler with that protective instinct for each other. I like the way that what makes him use his power is when he thinks something bad is going to happen to Piper because he wants to protect her because she's kind of like his mommy figure. And I like the way that we have this like interaction with Ludlow here. He's one of those villains that's like really enjoyable. Like
Yeah.
he's like evil and creepy, but like in a fun, entertaining kind of way.
Absolutely, I definitely agree.
He reminds me of like a grandpa. He's like, "Kids these days don't have any manners."
Yeah, genuinely. No man is who raised you. Definitely gives off those kind of vibes. But yeah, no, I will say he's an enjoyable villain for us to have. I love when we have ones like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing I wanted to point out, like, he was like, "Your bounty's outside," but we saw them outside, and what was the bounty? Because there was nothing there.
Yeah, it was their life.
Yeah, it was just to not be there anymore, I guess.
Yeah. And obviously, we get this idea that their powers don't work. Piper couldn't freeze him, and then we see Leo can't orb in, so something is going on, kind of blocking their magic within the academy. Though Tyler's magic worked, so I'm kind of wondering how or why that's all going on.
Right. Whether or not it's something that he gets to pick, when it works and when it doesn't, or maybe just because Tyler's a fire starter and not on the good side. But then how would they have gotten in it the first place? You know what I mean? Yeah. No, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, unclear, but plot sake, you know.
So then outside of the academy, Piper is trying to blow up the gate, but there's this force field and it doesn't work. And Leo orbs out to go get her sisters.
So obviously, this is kind of just pushing our plot along and showing us that they're obviously having trouble getting in and gonna maybe need the power of 3. So then we're back at the manor in the attic, and Paige is looking through the book, and Phoebe is knitting and keeps flashing back and forth between black and white and color, and then eventually she just stays in black and white. Leo orbs in and says, "It's a disaster there. Ludlow has Tyler." And he looks at Phoebe, and Cole's like, "It's a disaster here too." And Leo's like, "Piper needs her sisters immediately." And Phoebe's like, "Oh, I'll be right with you as soon as I finish this sleeve." And Leo leans down next to her and is like, "A child is in danger, Phoebe. We need you now." And she's like, "Phoebe? Who's Phoebe?" And Paige is like, "She can't go with you. She doesn't even know who she is anymore." She's like, "I beg your pardon. I know exactly who I am. I am Mrs. Cole Turner." And Cole is like, "This is all wrong. Ever since I put that ring on your finger, you've been acting strange." She's like, "You mean I've been acting normal?" He's like, "Which is strange for you. You know, I gotta be honest. If this is what being married to you is going to be like, you could take that ring off now." And she stands up and she's like, "I will not. This ring is a symbol of our love." And Paige is like, "That's it, the ring. We've got to get it off." She's like, "Over my dead body." And Paige calls for it and it appears in her hand. And Phoebe looks down at her hand and starts flashing back and forth. And Paige looks at the ring and says, "Listen to this inscription." To gain another is to lose yourself. And Cole says, Gramps cursed the ring? Why? And Leo's like, I don't know. Good question. Look. And Phoebe looks back to normal, but is still feeling confused. And Cole leans down next to her and says, well, nothing will remind you of who you are better than saving an innocent. Now go to work.
I love this scene. Another very cute one, another one that's kind of comedic. We get to see the struggle between Paige and Cole trying to figure out, how to get Phoebe out of this. And then her having that realization of the ring that Grams cursed it, probably to forget everything she hated about being married, even though she did it 6 times. So, God only knows. I guess 6 times the charm.
I will say here, I also really enjoy the way that Cole doesn't want this version of Phoebe, right?
Yeah.
Because he's in love with the real Phoebe. So, kind of seeing this quote unquote normal Phoebe, he's like, look, this is not who I want to marry. Like, I want to marry that badass, strong, independent woman that I fell in love with,
Exactly.
whose job is fighting evil. And I need you to go do that now because that's what's going to make you yourself again. And that's who I love. And that's who I want to marry.
And I love that. I love that so much. She really just loves her for who she is.
Yeah, it's very sweet. It's very cute. And it's probably the most healthy thing about their relationship.
Probably the only healthy thing about the relationship. So then we're outside of the academy, and the sisters and Leo orb in, and Piper says, I can't get in. You gotta write a spell. And Paige is like, are you up to it? And Phoebe says, I think so. Door unlock, no magic block. And the sisters grab hands and all say it. And the gate glows red, and Piper approaches it, but she still isn't able to get through. And Phoebe says, honey, maybe we should go back and check the Book of Shadows again. And Piper's like very focused and scared and says, I can't leave Tyler here. And Paige says, it doesn't look like you have much of a choice. And they start to turn. Then they hear Tyler scream for him not to hurt him, even though he was knocked out. And Piper freaks out at this and blows up the gate 3 times until it finally works and just destroys it. And Phoebe's like, what was that? And Paige says, I think you just saw a mother lift a car off her child. Again, another scene that's just everything. We see like the intensity and the maturity and that instinct that Piper does have, something that she didn't think that she would, but all she does is care about Tyler being safe, and it's really, really cute to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. It feels so plot sake to me. Like I do agree that it's very cute and I like this idea that like it's Piper's care for Tyler that kind of saves the day, but like why did the power of 3 spell not work? Why could Piper suddenly use her powers? Why did we hear Tyler screaming when he was unconscious? Like there are just some things here where I'm like,
Yeah, they definitely don't add up. Like I saw what they were going for, and it's still like, oh, like she cared that much, she was able to do it, but there's no logic in it.
yeah, none at all. But it pushes our plot forward, so you know what? Sure.
Exactly.
So then we're inside the academy, and Tyler's covered in like frost and he's laying on a table. Ludlow's hands are hovering over him, and he's saying, all the pain is over. Soon you will serve the source. And then the door blows open, and the sisters walk in, and Piper's like, I'm back. And Ludlow's like, I paid you your bounty. And it's like, when?
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, that's not what I'm after. And she blows up his arm and he flies back. And Piper's like, power of 3 spell. Phoebe's like, I don't have one. And she's like, what? And Paige is like, I did one. And they read off the spell and it's not good, but it works. And Phoebe's like, what the hell was that? She's like, a haiku. I couldn't do the rhyming thing. And they go over to Tyler and Leo heals him to unfreeze him. He wakes up and they go. So as we see here, Tyler was still fucking unconscious, so there's no way he
Yeah,
yelled.
that definitely didn't add up. It was very, very pointless, very plot sakey, like you said.
Yes.
Like they should have just had the magic or the power of 3 spell work,
And I guess it was only her freezing power that didn't work, because obviously, as we saw here, she was able to use her blowing up power on Ludlow. And then we get, of course, the Vanquish with the Power of Three spell, which Paige wrote. Good on Paige. We're so proud of you.
Even though that was like the worst spell I've ever heard in my life, it was hysterical to watch. I love watching it every time.
Yeah, it is pretty funny.
But yeah, aside from that, some of it just isn't quite adding up, but I see what they're getting at. Ludlow's gone officially, and Tyler is healed, and all should be okay again.
Yes, it seems that way.
So then we move back to the manor, and we're in the kitchen, and it's nighttime. We see Piper is holding a potion, and Tyler is standing there, and she asks if he's sure that he wants to do this. She says it's an awful lot to give up, and he says, no, it's not for me. Then Leo watches from across the room, and she tells him that it'll bind his powers, not strip them. Then he drinks the potion and burps, and Piper tells him to say excuse me, and he does. And Piper's like, Ludlow's right, nobody teaches manners anymore. Then Tyler turns to Leo and says, do you think it worked? And Leo tells him to try his power. He focuses on the table and nothing happens. And then he smiles and says, I'm normal. And Piper says, whatever that means. Then he starts to run off. She asks where he's going, and he's like, well, to play video games. Then he goes, and Leo smiles and says, still want to have a baby? And she's like, uh-huh, I'm just not ready for an adolescent yet. And Leo says, Paige said she found a good family not too far from here. And she says, I'm glad because I want visitation rights. Plus, you know I have to be in touch in case he ever needs his powers back. And Leo's like, you think he will? She says, I don't know. He's a surprising kid. Leo says, yeah, like the piggyback orb. And she was like, I was so focused on how I was going to guide him, then he ended up guiding me. And Leo asks how, and she's like, well, you know how I was upset with Gramps for binding our powers, leaving us unprepared for a magical future. And Leo's like, you mentioned it once or twice. She's like, well, now I see the wisdom in her decision. I mean, she realized someday we were going to have to battle demons, but she also realized that children shouldn't live in fear. They need to feel safe to explore and learn and grow. I still think magic is a gift, but Grams gave us the biggest gift of all, a normal childhood, the gift of innocence. And he smiles and they hug.
So this is such a rewrite of why Grams bound their powers. She bound their powers to protect them from Nicholas.
Yeah.
That was the only reason. She wanted them to have powers. She wanted them to grow up magical. That was a constant source of fighting between her and Victor. This is all stuff we've heard before.
Yeah.
So the show is just completely forgetting everything that's ever happened in the last 4 seasons. So that really like confused me and kind of pissed me off a little bit because I was like, that's just not true.
Yeah. They might not even think of it like that.
But I mean, you know, in terms of their conversation and them kind of settling on this, the idea that maybe they might want to bind their kids' powers at least temporarily in order to give them a normal childhood. We'll see if that's what actually ends up happening if one day they do have kids. But I think it's an interesting conversation and it feels really healthy and well discussed here, especially after seeing what Tyler went through. I like that Tyler made this decision for himself, and Piper did leave that option open for him if he wants to regain his powers in the future.
Of course.
That that's something they could do for him. I thought that was sweet. I also like the way that they formed this connection with him, and Piper wants to continue to have a relationship with him even as he moves on to a new family.
I know, saying like, good, because I want visitation rights. Like, I love that they built that connection so fast within each other, and I don't know, it's like they have their own little kid now, and I love that. It's really cute to see them as a couple kind of parenting somebody, you know?
Yes. Though I am wondering, will we ever see Tyler again?
Will we even hear about him ever again? God only knows.
True. Aside from that, you know, there were a couple funny moments in here, like when Tyler rushes off to play video games, and they're like, oh, I'm not ready for like an adolescent. And the moment where he burps and Piper's like, Ludlow's right, like no manners in these kids. There's just a couple little moments of comedy in this otherwise really healthy and really effective scene.
Absolutely.
So then we go to our final scene of the episode. We're in the bathroom, and Phoebe and Cole are in the bath together, and he's splashing. And Phoebe's like, okay, I'll say it. Stop splashing. Cole Turner is the greatest lawyer in all the world. And he laughs and says, greatest unemployed lawyer in all the world. Although Mr. Yates did respond to my persuasive argument and got the tenant's heat back on. She's like, and he's not going to press charges? And Cole says, nope. His lawyer thought the case would raise more issues than it closed. And she says, I'm so proud of you. And they kiss. And Cole says, now that was colorful. And she says, okay. Now I think I figured out what Grams did to this ring here. And she picks it up because for some reason it was just sitting there on the side of the tub. And she says, I think to keep her from making a seventh mistake, she put a hex on the ring so that if she ever got engaged again, the ring would remind her of what she hated about marriage. He's like, the loss of identity, the subjugation by a man, the focus on housework. And she's like, all those things that I was afraid of. He says, but Grams was from a different era. That's not going to happen to us. Sitting and knitting is not the woman you are, just like sitting and typing is not the man that I am. And she laughs and says, no, I can't picture you doing that. He says, but can you picture us together? Or are you so freaked out by marriage that you don't? She says, no, I want to marry you. We just have to work extra hard to make sure neither one of us loses our identity. And as for Grams and her notion of marriage, and she pulls the plug from the tub and says, we can watch that go down the drain. And then they laugh and start making it out and just throw this family heirloom down the drain.
I was thinking, like, why don't you just take the curse off? Like, you're still magical. Like, now you don't have a ring, first of all. And also, that was Grams's. Like, that was a family heirloom, like you said. A little odd, but I get it. It's their little plot sakey thing. Lesson learned, I guess.
Yeah. So, in terms of everything here, obviously we got the whole legal thing worked out. The slumlord is making things right and not suing Cole, so yay.
Yeah, big wins.
And then we have, of course, this idea that both of them still need to be these badass people they've always been, who they fell in love with each other being, but can still be a couple and get married. And I like this. And I like that they want to keep their identity at the forefront of their marriage and relationship. I think it's very common in relationships to want to change yourself and to become so closed in as a couple that you forget about your individual interests
Yeah.
and kind of the outside world. So the fact that they want to put a focus on not doing that and on not only caring about their marriage is really healthy and could be really good for them.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, genuinely. I like that we have this idea from them. And I don't know, I agree and I see it. Like, that's not the person she is, that's not the person she needs to be in order to make him happy. Like, he would never want that for her. So I do love to see that.
Yeah, me too. And I also love the idea of like Grams having hexed this ring because like she didn't want to get married a seventh time. I think it's really funny.
Definitely fits with Grams's personality as far as we know her, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
Final thoughts on the episode?
I really love this episode. I think in terms of long-term plots, obviously we've got the idea that the source is coming back. We got the growing of Cole and Phoebe's engagement and them, of course, figuring out who they want to be as a couple once they are married. We have Piper and Leo further talking about wanting kids. We have Paige doing her first spell and growing as a witch. I think we have a lot of like strong character development moments in this episode.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of strong ones. I mean, anything that we've seen is not something that's happening yet, but these do have those subtle hints of the season-long plot, which seems to be revolving around the source mostly and discussing Piper and Leo's and then Cole and Phoebe, you know?
Yeah.
So it definitely just helps push it forward. I generally think this is a really good episode. We have probably one of my favorite villains of the season in it. So all around, I thought it was pretty good despite the minor inconsistencies and plot sakes.
Yeah. I'd also like to give a quick kudos to the little boy who plays Tyler. A lot of times child actors aren't really good in my opinion, but I think he does a pretty good job throughout this episode and I enjoyed having him around.
Absolutely, me too.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. If you want to reach out to us or follow us on social media, we're on Instagram and TikTok at rewitched_pod. Or you can send us an email to rewitched.pod@gmail.com. Either way, we appreciate you listening and hope you'll join us back next time for season 4, episode 13, Charmed and Dangerous.